park here. This is handicap parking.
I have a handicap placard hanging right there.
You need to see proof you're actually disabled.
Proof? I'm in a wheelchair.
A lot of people fake disabilities to use these spots.
Are you seriously asking me to prove I'm disabled while I'm sitting in a wheelchair?
The building security camera was recording everything, every word, every movement, every moment of the interaction. And Officer Eric Nolan had absolutely no idea that the man sitting in the electric wheelchair, calmly loading architectural models into his van, had designed 3 major public buildings in Seattle, had testified before Congress on disability rights, and had a legal team on speed dial that specialized in Americans with Disabilities Act violations. The man wasn't panicking. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't trying to de-escalate. He was Andre Jefferson, a 41-year-old architect who'd spent 8 years navigating a world that constantly questioned his right to exist in accessible spaces. And now he was about to become the plaintiff in a federal lawsuit that would expose a 6-year pattern of disability discrimination, cost the city $750,000, end Eric's career in law enforcement, and send him to federal prison for civil rights violations. Before we dive into this absolutely insane story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Your country, your state, wherever you are. And if you've ever had someone question your disability, your parking, or your right to be somewhere you absolutely belonged, hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more outrageous. You don't want to miss what happens next. Andre Jefferson was one of the most respected architects in the Pacific Northwest. He'd graduated from MIT with honors, worked for 2 prestigious firms in Boston and San Francisco, then opened his own practice in Seattle 7 years ago. His firm specialized in accessible design, creating buildings that worked for people with disabilities. He'd won multiple awards. He'd been featured in Architectural Digest. He designed 3 major public buildings in Seattle. 8 years earlier, Andre had been in a car accident on Interstate 5. A drunk driver crossed the median and hit his car head-on. Andre survived, but his spinal cord was severed at the 10 vertebra. He spent 6 months in rehabilitation, learning to live as a paraplegic. Then he went back to work with a renewed focus, making the built environment accessible for everyone. He drove a specially modified van with a wheelchair ramp that deployed from the side. He used a high-end electric wheelchair for mobility. He had a state-issued disabled parking placard that hung from his rearview mirror. He had disabled license plates. He had every legal right to park in handicapped spaces. That Tuesday afternoon, he had a 3 o'clock meeting with a potential client. A developer wanted to build a mixed-use complex and needed an architect who understood accessibility requirements. Andre had parked in one of 4 handicapped spaces directly in front of the building at 2 o'clock, giving himself an hour to unload his materials and prepare. His presentation required physical architectural models and material samples. He'd arrived early, deployed his wheelchair ramp, rolled out in his electric wheelchair, and opened the rear doors of his van. He was in the process of carefully transferring models from the van into his wheelchair storage basket and onto a rolling cart when a police car pulled up behind him. Officer Eric Nolan was 32 years old with 6 years on the Seattle Police Department. He'd been assigned to parking enforcement for the past 2 years after multiple complaints about his conduct during street patrols. His job was to monitor parking violations in the downtown area. When Eric saw the van in the handicapped space with a black man moving items around it, something triggered in his mind. He didn't process the electric wheelchair. He didn't process the deployed ramp. He didn't process the disabled plates. He saw what he wanted to see. Someone he assumed was abusing handicap parking. He got out of his patrol car and walked up. Andre was focused on carefully positioning a scale model in his wheelchair storage basket. He heard footsteps but didn't look up until Eric spoke. "You can't park here. This is handicap parking." Andre looked up from his wheelchair, confused. He was literally sitting in a $12,000 electric wheelchair. His legs were motionless in the footrests. The wheelchair controls were visible on his armrest. He gestured toward his van's rearview mirror. "I have a handicap placard. It's hanging right there." Eric barely glanced at the blue placard clearly visible through the windshield. "I need to see proof you're actually disabled." Andre stared at him in absolute disbelief. He looked down at his wheelchair, looked at his motionless legs, looked back at the officer. "Proof? I'm in a wheelchair. A lot of people fake disabilities to use these spots. Are you seriously asking me to prove I'm disabled while I'm sitting in a wheelchair? Step away from the vehicle. Now." Quick question for you watching. Can you believe what you just heard? Type your reaction in the comments. Andre felt a cold rage building. This officer was looking directly at him in an electric wheelchair. with visible paralysis and demanding proof he was disabled. "Officer, I'm sitting in a wheelchair, an electric wheelchair. I'm clearly paralyzed from the waist down. My legs don't work. I have a state-issued placard. I have disabled license plates. What part of this looks fake to you?" Eric's face hardened. "Sir, I need you to step away from the vehicle so I can inspect your documentation." Andre's voice remained calm but ice cold. "I can't step anywhere. I'm paralyzed. That's what the wheelchair means. Don't be difficult. Move away from the vehicle. I am moving, on wheels, because I can't walk." A building security guard had been watching from inside the lobby. His name was Kevin Park, and he'd worked there for 12 years. He recognized Andre from previous meetings. When he saw the confrontation, he came outside, his phone already recording. "Officer, that's Mr. Jefferson. He's an architect. He has a meeting here. He's clearly in a wheelchair." Eric spun toward Kevin. "Sir, this is a police matter. Step back. I'm just saying he's obviously disabled. He's in a wheelchair. What's the issue?" "The issue is verifying legitimate handicap parking use." Andre pulled out his phone and started recording. "Officer, for the record, I'm Andre Jefferson. I'm a paraplegic. I'm sitting in an electric wheelchair. I'm legally parked in a handicapped space with a valid state-issued placard visible in my window and disabled license plates on my vehicle. You're looking at me in a wheelchair and demanding proof I'm disabled. I'm recording this interaction for my protection." Eric stepped closer. "Turn that camera off. I have a First Amendment right to record a public official in public. I'm ordering you to stop recording, and I'm declining that unlawful order." A woman walking past had stopped when she heard raised voices. She saw Andre in his wheelchair, surrounded by architectural models, clearly loading equipment for work. She saw the officer confronting him. "Officer, that man is in a wheelchair. What are you doing?" Eric's face was reddening. "Ma'am, move along. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when I see harassment. Look at him. He's in a wheelchair. He has a placard. What more do you need?" Another pedestrian stopped, then another. A small crowd was forming on the sidewalk, all of them seeing the same thing: a black man in an electric wheelchair being confronted by a police officer while trying to load equipment for work. The absurdity was obvious to everyone except Eric. Andre kept his phone up, recording. "Officer Nolan," he said, reading the name tag. "You've demanded I prove my disability despite visible evidence. You've ordered me to step away despite seeing I'm in a wheelchair. You've attempted to prevent me from recording. This is disability, discrimination, and a violation of my civil rights." Eric reached toward Andre's phone. "I said, turn it off." Andre pulled the phone back. "Don't touch me or my property." Kevin was also recording. "Officer, I've worked here 12 years. Mr. Jefferson comes here regularly. Always in his wheelchair, always professional. This is harassment." A man in a business suit pushed through the growing crowd. Paul Reynolds, the developer Andre was supposed to meet. He'd come down early to check if Andre had arrived. "Andre, what's going on out here?" Andre looked relieved. "Paul, this officer is asking me to prove I'm disabled." Paul looked at Eric, at Andre sitting in his electric wheelchair, at the deployed ramp, at the placard in the van window, at the disabled plates. His confusion turned to anger. "Officer, this is my architect. We have a meeting in 45 minutes. He's clearly disabled. He's sitting in a wheelchair. What possible justification do you have for this?" Eric was surrounded now. A crowd of about 15 people. Kevin recording. Paul demanding answers. Multiple witnesses with phones out. And Andre sitting calmly in his electric wheelchair, camera running, letting everyone see exactly what was happening. "Everyone needs to step back or I'll cite all of you for obstruction." Kevin spoke up. "You're going to cite us for watching you harass a disabled man?" Someone in the crowd laughed. Others joined in. Not cruel laughter, nervous laughter at the sheer absurdity of watching a police officer demand that a man in a wheelchair prove he's disabled. Do you think the officer realized how badly he'd messed up? Type yes or no in the comments. Kevin had already called Seattle Police Dispatch to request a supervisor. Sergeant Grace Liu arrived 9 minutes later. She pulled up and immediately assessed the scene. Crowd of civilians, many recording. Officer looking flustered and defensive, and a man sitting in an electric wheelchair with a deployed van, ramp, and architectural materials around him. She walked up to Eric. "What's the situation?" "Verifying handicap parking eligibility." Sergeant Liu looked at Andre, at the wheelchair, at his motionless legs, at the placard visible in the van window, at the disabled plates, at the ramp deployed from the side of the van. "Officer Nolan, he's sitting in a wheelchair. I need to verify he's in a wheelchair, an electric wheelchair, with a valid placard and disabled plates. What exactly needs verification?" Silence. Sergeant Liu walked over to Andre. Sir, I apologize for this interaction. You're clearly legally parked. You're free to continue your business. Andre nodded. I appreciate that, Sergeant, but I'm filing a formal complaint. This officer looked at me sitting in a wheelchair and demanded medical proof I'm disabled. He ordered me to step away, despite obviously seeing I can't walk. He attempted to stop me from recording. This is disability discrimination and a civil rights violation. You have every right to file a complaint. I'll get you the information. Paul stepped forward. Sergeant, I witnessed this entire interaction. I'll provide a statement. This was outrageous. Kevin added, I've got it all on video. He told a man in a wheelchair to step away from his vehicle. It's all recorded. Multiple witnesses volunteered statements. The woman who'd first stopped. Several people who'd recorded the encounter. All of them describing the same thing. A police officer demanding a man in a wheelchair prove he's disabled. Sergeant Liu collected contact information. She asked Eric to return to his patrol car. The tension in Eric's jaw showed he knew this was serious. Andre finished loading his equipment into his wheelchair's basket and onto the rolling cart. Paul helped him with the last few models. Then Andre rolled up the building's accessible ramp into the lobby, his dignity intact despite Eric's attempt to humiliate him. Eric sat in his patrol car, watching, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. He'd confronted a man in a wheelchair, demanded proof of disability, ordered him to step away when he clearly couldn't walk, all on camera, in front of witnesses, with no justification whatsoever. His career was over. He just didn't know yet how completely. The meeting went well. Andre and Paul discussed the project for 2 hours. Paul was even more impressed after witnessing Andre's composure during the confrontation. At the end, he said, after what I saw today, I'm convinced you're the right architect. You understand accessibility isn't just about ramps and regulations. It's about dignity and respect. That evening, Andre contacted the Northwest Disability Rights Center. They specialized in ADA violations and disability discrimination. When they heard his story and saw the videos, they immediately took his case. Kevin's video was devastating. It showed Eric approaching Andre, who was clearly sitting in an electric wheelchair, loading equipment. It showed the entire exchange. Eric demanding proof, Andre pointing out he's in a wheelchair. Eric insisting, Andre remaining calm. The crowd gathering. The witnesses protesting, all of it crystal clear. The Seattle Police Department's internal affairs investigation opened the next day. The investigator was Captain Thomas Rodriguez, a 28-year veteran who'd seen a lot of bad policing in his career. This ranked near the top. He watched all the footage, Andre's cell phone video, Kevin's video, the building security camera footage. Every angle showed the same thing. An officer looking directly at a man in an electric wheelchair and demanding proof he was disabled. But Captain Rodriguez didn't stop there. He pulled Eric's complete service record, and what he found was deeply troubling. Over 6 years, Eric had issued 83 handicap parking citations. That number alone wasn't alarming. What was alarming was the contest rate. 47 of those citations had been contested in administrative hearings. That was a 57% contest rate. The department average was 12%. Even more damning, 39 of those contested citations were dismissed after hearing. The hearing officers found no violation had occurred. Eric had issued citations to people who were legally parked with valid documentation. The pattern was clear. Eric was overzealous in enforcing handicap parking rules and frequently wrong. But it was worse than that. Captain Rodriguez analyzed the demographics of Eric's citations. Of the 83 citations Eric had issued, 64 were to minorities, 77%. In a city where minorities made up 43% of the population. When he controlled for contest rates, the disparity was even starker. White drivers who received Eric's citations contested them 18% of the time. Minority drivers contested them 72% of the time. That suggested Eric was citing white drivers who were genuinely in violation, but citing minority drivers who had proper documentation. Captain Rodriguez also found 12 previous complaints specifically about Eric's conduct during handicap parking enforcement. Not complaints about citations themselves, but complaints about how Eric conducted the enforcement. Complaints about demanding additional proof beyond state-issued placards. Complaints about questioning the legitimacy of visible disabilities. Complaints about making offensive comments. Complaints about racial profiling. All 12 complaints had been dismissed as insufficient evidence or marked counseling provided. No discipline, no pattern recognition, no intervention. Captain Rodriguez did what the previous investigators should have done. He tracked down the complainants from those previous cases and interviewed them. He He interviewed Robert Jimenez, a Hispanic Marine Corps veteran who'd lost his right leg below the knee in Afghanistan. Robert had been stopped by Eric 3 years earlier. Eric had accused him of using someone else's placard. Robert was wearing shorts. His prosthetic leg was clearly visible. Eric had demanded Robert prove the placard belonged to him by showing documentation of his amputation. Robert filed a complaint. It was dismissed as insufficient evidence because there was no video. He interviewed Susan Tanaka, an Asian woman with multiple sclerosis. She'd been stopped by Eric 2 years earlier. Eric told her she didn't look disabled and questioned why she needed a handicap space when she could walk into the building. Susan explained that MS causes severe fatigue and pain, and that her disability wasn't always visible. Eric gave her a citation anyway. She contested it. The hearing officer dismissed it. Her complaint about Eric was marked counseling provided. He interviewed Jerome Williams, a black man with cerebral palsy. Eric had stopped him 18 months earlier. Eric demanded Jerome walk a straight line to prove he actually needed the handicap space. Jerome's cerebral palsy affects his gait imbalance. He tried to explain this. Eric accused him of being drunk and threatened to arrest him for DUI. A supervisor arrived and let Jerome go. Jerome's complaint was dismissed as no misconduct found. Each story was worse than the last. Each showed Eric making assumptions about what disability looked like and refusing to accept that disabilities are diverse. Each showed him targeting people who happened to be minorities. Captain Rodriguez documented every case. He showed how the pattern had been visible for years if anyone had been looking. He showed how each dismissed complaint had been treated in isolation without anyone asking whether this officer might have a deeper problem. Captain Rodriguez's report was 78 pages long. His conclusion: Officer Nolan demonstrates a pattern of disability discrimination, racial bias, and fundamental misunderstanding of the Americans with Disabilities Act. His harassment of Mr. Jefferson, a paraplegic architect sitting in an electric wheelchair, asking him to prove his disability, represents not an isolated incident, but the continuation of 6 years of civil rights violations. His recommendation: immediate termination and referral to the Department of Justice for possible federal civil rights charges. Eric was fired within 72 hours of the incident. The Seattle police chief held a press conference announcing the termination and apologizing to Andre and the disability community. But the consequences didn't stop there. The Department of Justice did investigate. They found that Eric's pattern of conduct violated the ADA and constituted a pattern of civil rights violations. They referred the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Eric was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal crime. He pled guilty as part of a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison, 2 years of supervised release, and permanent prohibition from working in law enforcement. Andre filed a federal lawsuit, not just against Eric, but against the city of Seattle for failing to address Eric's pattern of discrimination despite 12 previous complaints. The lawsuit alleged violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, violations of the Rehabilitation Act, deprivation of civil rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The city's attorneys looked at the evidence. Multiple videos from different angles showing Eric confronting a man in a wheelchair and demanding proof of disability. 15 witness statements. Eric's 6-year pattern of discrimination. 12 dismissed complaints that should have triggered action. A plaintiff who was a respected architect with impeccable credibility. They settled in 8 weeks. $750,000. But the settlement required far more than money. The reforms included mandatory ADA training for all officers, specific training on disability rights and parking enforcement, quarterly audits of handicap parking citations to identify discriminatory patterns, creation of a disability rights liaison position within the department, and implementation of a policy requiring supervisory review of any complaint related to disability discrimination. The settlement also required the Seattle Police Department to publicly release data on all handicap parking citations for the previous 10 years, broken down by officer, location, and race of the cited individual. The city initially resisted the data release. Their attorneys argued it would expose officers to harassment. Andre's response was simple: transparency creates accountability. If officers are enforcing the law fairly, they have nothing to hide. The city accepted the terms. If you think this settlement was justified, type justice in the comments. The settlement press conference was covered by every disability rights organization in the country. Andre rolled up to the podium in his electric wheelchair. "I'm a successful architect. I drive a modified van. I use an electric wheelchair. I have every legal accommodation I need. And a police officer looked at me sitting in my wheelchair and asked me to prove I was disabled. not because I lacked documentation, not because I was parked illegally, but because he made assumptions based on my skin color that overrode the visible evidence right in front of him. He paused, looking directly at the cameras. I'm fortunate. I know my rights. I had witnesses. I had video. I had the resources to fight back. But the Department of Justice investigation found 12 other people who Officer Nolan harassed. People who didn't fight back. People who just accepted the citation and paid the fine because they didn't know they could challenge it. Those are the people I'm thinking about. That's why this case matters. The press conference went viral. Kevin's video was viewed 35 million times in the first 2 weeks. People were outraged. A police officer looking at a man in a wheelchair and demanding proof he's disabled. The visual was undeniable. The discrimination was obvious. The comment sections exploded. People with disabilities shared their stories, being told they didn't look disabled, being questioned about their parking, being asked to prove their conditions, being treated as frauds until they could provide documentation. The hashtag #DisabledWhileBlack trended for 5 days. People shared experiences of facing both racism and ableism simultaneously. Disability rights organizations used Andre's case to launch a national campaign. The image of Andre in his wheelchair, calmly loading equipment while being harassed, became iconic. What more proof do you need? The campaign posters asked. The security camera footage became required viewing in police academies. It showed exactly what not to do. How assumptions about disability can lead to discrimination, how failure to recognize obvious accommodations can constitute civil rights violations, how bias can blind people to evidence right in front of them. The Seattle Police Department implemented all required reforms. The handicap parking citation data was made public on a dedicated website. Anyone could search by officer, by year, by location, by outcome. Complete transparency. The patterns that emerged were shocking, but not surprising to disability advocates. Over 10 years, minority disabled drivers have been cited at rates 2.7 times higher than white disabled drivers. Citations against minorities were contested at rates 84% higher and dismissed at rates 63% higher. The data revealed 15 officers with patterns similar to Eric's. 4 were terminated, 6 were reassigned, 5 received final warnings. Once the patterns were visible, once there was accountability, the behavior changed. In the first year after the settlement, discriminatory citation patterns decreased by 46%. The disability community noticed immediately. Andre continued his architecture practice with renewed purpose. The project with Paul won a National Design Award. Andre became a sought-after consultant on disability rights and law enforcement. He testified before Congress. He joined the board of the Northwest Disability Rights Center. Eric served his 6 months in federal prison. When released, he found work doing data entry for $18 an hour. He lost his apartment. His wife divorced him. His parents were ashamed. His friends abandoned him. He tells himself he was just doing his job. But late at night, he knows the truth. He looked at a black man in a wheelchair and his bias was so strong, he demanded proof of a disability he could literally see. And it cost him everything. Andre still drives the same modified van, still uses the same electric wheelchair. The video of him calmly loading equipment while being harassed is now used in disability rights training worldwide. The impact of Andre's case rippled across the country for years. Within 6 months, 23 cities had implemented similar transparency requirements for handicap parking enforcement. Police departments in Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, and Atlanta created disability rights training programs modeled on Seattle's reforms. The International Association of Chiefs of Police invited Andre to speak at their annual conference. Over 5,000 police executives heard him tell his story, heard him describe sitting in his wheelchair, loading equipment, and being told to prove he was disabled. The room was silent when he finished. The applause lasted 3 minutes. The video became a case study, not just in police misconduct, but in how bias can override visible evidence. Psychologists used it to teach about confirmation bias. Sociologists used it to teach about intersectionality. Medical schools used it to teach about ableism in society. Andre's architecture firm grew significantly. Clients specifically sought him out after seeing his story. They wanted an architect who understood accessibility as a civil right, not a checkbox. His firm hired 3 additional architects, 2 of whom had disabilities themselves. He designed a new Seattle Public Library branch that became a national model. Every element was designed for universal access. The American Library Association gave it their highest accessibility award. Visitors never noticed the accessibility features because they were integrated so seamlessly. That was the point. He consulted on a major transit expansion project, ensuring new light rail stations were truly accessible. Not hidden elevators, not afterthought ramps, dignity-preserving design from the start. His personal life changed too. He met Jennifer, a wheelchair user and civil rights attorney, at a disability rights conference. They bonded over shared experiences and a shared commitment to change. They married 2 years after his case settled. Together, they became one of the most influential disability rights couples in the country. They testified before state legislatures. They wrote op-eds for national publications. They appeared on news programs. They became the public face of disability rights advocacy. Kevin, the security guard who recorded the confrontation, also became an advocate. He'd worked building security for 12 years and had seen Andre visit dozens of times. When he heard Eric demanding proof from a man in a wheelchair, he knew he needed to record. His video made the case undeniable. He was invited to speak at security training conferences about being an active bystander, about documenting injustice, about standing up even when it's uncomfortable. Paul, the developer, made accessibility a core value of his company. Every project had to exceed minimum requirements. He hired Andre's firm as consultants on all major developments. He established a fund to help small businesses improve accessibility. The viral video changed him, made him see discrimination he'd never noticed before, made him understand his privilege in never thinking about steps, doors, or parking. Eric's post-prison life was one of complete collapse. The data entry job lasted 6 months before layoffs. He applied to 57 jobs over the next year. 3 interviews, all 3 ended when they Googled his name. Officer who asked man in wheelchair for proof of disability was the first search result. The video was second, his mugshot third. He tried legally changing his name. Someone on Reddit connected the names. The video followed him everywhere. His brother asked him to move out after 14 months. Eric found a room in a boarding house, sharing a bathroom with 6 strangers. His life reduced to a single room and occasional minimum wage work. His wife divorced him in prison. His parents stopped inviting him to family events. His sister blocked his number. His nieces and nephews were told not to mention him. Late at night, he'd watch the video on his phone, trying to understand his own thinking. He saw himself approaching Andre, who was clearly in a wheelchair, saw himself demanding proof, saw Andre's calm response, saw himself insisting, saw the crowd gathering, saw witnesses pointing out the obvious. The moment that haunted him most, when he told Andre to step away from the vehicle. Andre was in a wheelchair. How was he supposed to step? What had Eric been thinking? He knew the answer. He hadn't been thinking. He'd been assuming fraud, assuming abuse, assuming a black man in a nice van didn't belong in that parking space. His assumptions were so strong, they overrode the wheelchair right in front of him. Sometimes he told himself it was one mistake, but then he'd remember the internal affairs report, 12 other victims, 83 citations with a 57% contest rate, 6 years of targeting minorities. It wasn't one mistake, it was a pattern Andre exposed. The video lived forever online. Students watched it in college courses. Activists shared it at protests. Disability organizations used it in their materials. The image of Andre in his wheelchair, calmly loading equipment while Eric demanded proof, became iconic. Andre never intended to be a symbol. He just wanted to park and prepare for his meeting. But Eric's discrimination forced him into the spotlight. Andre used that spotlight to create change. 10 years later, Andre spoke at a national disability rights conference. 2,000 people in the audience, many in wheelchairs, many with invisible disabilities, many who'd been questioned and doubted throughout their lives. 10 years ago, I was loading equipment for a meeting. I was sitting in my wheelchair, and a police officer looked at me and asked for proof I was disabled. Not because my placard was missing, not because I lacked documentation, but because his assumptions were stronger than the evidence in front of him. The audience was silent. That officer lost everything, his job, his freedom, his future. But disabled people across this country still face discrimination every day. We won one battle. The war continues. More silence, so keep fighting, keep recording, keep filing complaints, keep demanding dignity. Because every time we refuse to accept discrimination, we create change. Every time we stand up, we move closer to a world where a man in a wheelchair doesn't have to prove he's disabled. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Many in the audience were crying. Andre Jefferson, 41 when he was told to prove his disability while sitting in a wheelchair. 51 now, still an architect, still an advocate, still refusing to accept discrimination as normal. His story, captured in 14 minutes of video, changed laws, ended a career, created accountability systems, and inspired millions to demand their dignity. All because one officer looked at visible evidence and chose to ignore it, and one architect refused to let that ignorance go unchallenged. One Tuesday afternoon, 14 minutes. A police officer who looked at a man in a wheelchair and demanded proof he was disabled. And an architect who showed the world what discrimination looks like even when the evidence is impossible to deny. If this story made you think about the assumptions we make about disability, share it. Hit subscribe for more stories about accountability. Drop a comment. Have you ever had your disability questioned while it was visibly obvious? Tell your story. See you in the next one.